Hi, this is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, joined by Sheldon Richmond, the vice president of the foundation. This is the Libertarian Angle, our internet show here at FFF that brings you the libertarian perspectives on what's going on in the world, the perspective that we all know that you're not going to get out there in the mainstream media. And you'll especially see that today when we talk about two of the great disasters in U.S. foreign policy, Afghanistan and Iran. And we'll start with Afghanistan. Sheldon, it's been 12 years since they invaded Afghanistan, and part of the rationale was that they were going to bring freedom to Afghanistan and democracy spreading, and they were going to, bring this paradise over to this part of the world. And really, it's just an absolute disaster after 12 years. You've got a crooked, corrupt regime where the president actually receives bag loads of cash, U.S. taxpayer money from the CIA. They walk in there and they hand it to him as part of the deal to permit U.S. troops to continue staying there. And now they're negotiated this deal where the U.S. is saying, please let us stay here. Let us have our bases here. Let us continue occupying. And it's really put the U.S. in a demeaning position in my estimation. I mean, these are people that should be grateful for what the U.S. has supposedly done for them, and yet it seems like the other way around. It's the U.S. that says, oh, thank you for letting us stay here. And it's just really part of the empire as far as I can see. They're going to leave troops there, whether it's 15,000 or 20,000. There's going to be ambushes. They're going to call them terrorist attacks. They're going to use that as the excuse to say, oh, see, the terrorists are still coming to get us. And it's going to provide money for the military-industrial complex. But I think after 12 years, if you haven't accomplished what you wanted to accomplish, despite having carte blanche to kill as many people as you wanted to kill and destroy as much of the country, you ain't going to accomplish anything. All you're going to do is just keep making things worse. I say it's time to do what they did with Iraq, another disaster, and get out of the country, bring the troops home, and discharge them into the private sector. How do you feel about it?
Well, I agree. They should have never gone in. They should come right home. They shouldn't even wait until the previous deadline, 2014. This is a very fluid situation. It's hard to keep up with what's going on. Last week, there was an agreement between the Obama administration and President Karzai, which was to keep troops there, as they put it, until 2024 and beyond. So the 2024 was not a real deadline at all if you had the words "and beyond." And this was an agreement that could be terminated by either party with 2 years' notice. So that means 2026 at the soonest. The only sticking points the U.S. really held out for and demanded was that the U.S. be able to engage in night raids, which Karzai was opposing because it so alienates the Afghan people. They can't stand the idea of American soldiers bursting in the middle of the night looking for so-called terrorists, and so the U.S. won that. And then also the idea that the U.S. Would have jurisdiction over civilian and military personnel who engaged in war crimes or other crimes in Afghanistan, rather than being subject to Afghan law. That was the deal breaker in Iraq. The U.S. Obama wanted to keep troops in Iraq, but Prime Minister Maliki wouldn't go for this waiving of jurisdiction, and so the U.S. didn't get their way. So it seemed like there was an agreement regarding Afghanistan. The agreement was being submitted to this Council of Elders and intellectuals, 2,500 leaders of the country, which while it didn't have a legally binding say in the matter, Karzai was willing to do what it is they wanted. The only thing Karzai was saying at the time was he didn't want to sign the agreement. He wanted the new president, because there was an election next spring, to sign the agreement, and that upset the U.S. because they said they couldn't do any planning if they have to wait until next April or March or April to find out if this thing's going to be signed. Karzai said he'd leave it up to this council, which agreed, first of all, approved the agreement, and also said that Karzai ought to sign it. Now Karzai's saying he doesn't. It seems like he's going back and taking back things he had already conceded. No night raids for American troops. And so he's now playing hardball again. I assume he's playing to the domestic audience. And Obama's now saying, okay, if that's the case, we'll just pull out. So maybe we're in a good situation. I mean, I don't think it's going to play out this way, unfortunately, but maybe Obama will just pull out. I mean, here's the basic thing. When Obama's talking to the American people, the presence in Afghanistan is portrayed as something good for the American people, for the security of the American people. When he's talking to Karzai, he talks about it as being good for Karzai. So really, which is it? Are we there? Whose benefit is who's the primary beneficiary of the U.S. presence? Karzai has reason to believe that his government will fall, or the next government will fall if the U.S. gets out. So he probably does want troops to stay, but he's also got to play his domestic card. And on the other hand, the U.S. needs the American people probably wouldn't support a presence there purely for the sake of the Afghan people. So it has to be portrayed to us as being something that's in our national security. It's a bankrupt policy. It makes no sense. It falls apart the moment you touch it, and that's where we are today.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point. And really the big beneficiaries of this thing are the defense contractors and all the people that are supplying the troops, the people that have made money off this thing from the very beginning. I mean, that's what Eisenhower was talking about in his farewell address, is the dangers of this military-industrial complex, which is filled with gigantic numbers of people, of businesses that have become dependent on this giant complex. And it's in their interest that the U.S. maintain bases all over the world, and it's really in their interest that there's this constant conflict and turmoil where they can be justifying new weapon systems and new really extensions of their racket. And I'd also like to say something about these nighttime raids that you mentioned. This is a really fascinating phenomenon because it really demonstrates the mindset of the national security state. I mean, if you go back to the Bill of Rights, we have express restrictions on federal power, that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, and people won't have their personal effects and their businesses and homes searched without warrants detailing probable cause issued by judges and so forth. And people could theoretically make the argument that those restrictions and prohibitions are not necessary, that we should just trust the government would never do anything like this. Well, nonsense. I mean, it really goes to show you the wisdom of having these kind of restrictions because look what they've done with the NSA. I mean, they've done blanket searches of people's telephone records or telephone calls or emails without a particular search, and it demonstrates their mindset. We see these kind of raids in the drug war here in the United States. Now, granted, many of them are based on warrants, but I think what we see in Afghanistan is the mindset of these people, that if they had their way in the United States, they would have a warrantless bashing of doors down in people's homes looking for drugs or whatever else they wanted to if it hadn't been for that Fourth Amendment. I mean, they go into Afghanistan and they say, we want to establish a free society. We want to show you what freedom's all about. The first thing they do is create a gigantic tyrannical military force that's pro-U.S. And then they've got these nighttime raids where they just go in there and bash down people's doors, shooting guns like crazy. If people try to defend themselves, they call them terrorists. I mean, why would Karzai put up with this? Why would the Afghan people put up with it? And I can see why Obama wants immunity from U.S. troops, because he knows if they're going in there and bashing people's door down, killing innocent people, and they're going to be immune from prosecution under what he's demanding. They'd be immune from prosecution by the U.S., which is never going to do anything to them, and they want immunity from the Afghan people. To me, in terms of what the United States is supposed to portray to the world, this is an absolute moral abomination.
Yeah, there were reports last week that in return for this agreement having a provision for allowing the raids, Obama would write a letter acknowledging mistakes in the past and promising that they wouldn't happen again. When that was reported and when Secretary of State Kerry was asked about it, he emphatically said that no apology was discussed. The Afghans didn't ask for an apology, and there would be no letter of apology. Of course, he's putting the word apology on it. The original report was that there would simply be a letter acknowledging mistakes. So he could, in a way, very narrowly, in sort of a Clintonian way, say there will be no letter of apology, but there could still be a letter acknowledging mistakes, right? It's not the same thing as an apology. He's not saying I'm sorry. He's just saying, yes, we made mistakes. I don't know where that all stands now. It seems all up in the air since Karzai seems to be backtracking from where he was last week. It's going to be very interesting. I mean, the Taliban is involved in the government. There's talks with the Taliban by the Karzai government. Karzai himself said he could easily be a member of the Taliban, and to boot, the Afghan government just announced the other day they're going to restore stoning as a penalty for adultery. So it sounds very much like the Taliban anyway. So what's the point? And then, of course, we need to turn to Al-Qaeda. The U.S. will say one big reason is we need to make sure Al-Qaeda doesn't have a safe haven. And that makes no sense because, look, the 9/11 plots were hatched in Hamburg, Germany, probably even in the United States because some of the people were over here doing the planning. Afghanistan was not a necessary location. And since the U.S. has been there and in Iraq, Al-Qaeda has offshoots now all over the place, in Iraq, in Syria, in Africa, in the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen. So they can be everywhere. So the idea that we have to be in Afghanistan to keep Al Qaeda from plotting, the logic of that is we need to occupy every country in the world to keep Al Qaeda from plotting. There's nothing special about Afghanistan. I mean, after all, Osama bin Laden and his people were in Pakistan shortly after the U.S. invaded. All that time they were in Pakistan. They only caught him in 2011. So he was in Pakistan, not Afghanistan. So there's nothing magical about Afghanistan. This is just for American consumption, for American, the American public, which doesn't pay close attention to this stuff. Just scare them a little bit by saying Al Qaeda or terrorism, and then Americans say, well, okay, I guess they got to be there, and they won't put up any fuss. But they need to know that it's a bogus threat and it's costing, billions of dollars and lives, and Americans are killing innocent Afghans. We have to make people sick at that policy and demand an end to it.
Well, not only do they have to occupy every country, but they've got to essentially occupy every home and every hotel room where all these kind of plans can take place. Because as you point out, if you're going to plan a terrorist attack, it can be done anywhere. But now that I think about it, that's exactly what they're doing with their NSA spying on everybody in the world. They're having to monitor everybody because of this fear that the terrorists are coming to get us. But it really doesn't get to the root of the problem, because the root of the problem is not just this thing about terrorists coming to get America. It's the U.S. government, the national security state, the military, the CIA, that is producing the anger and hatred that manifests itself in the terrorism. That's what they just don't get, or maybe they get it and they figure, well, they're not going to do anything about it because they want their empire. But, I've said that what happened in Afghanistan with the military invasion there to get this gang, bin Laden's gang, they killed so many innocent people. In fact, if I had to estimate, I'd say 98, 99% of the people they've killed in Afghanistan had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. But in the process of killing all these innocent people, grandfathers, children, wedding parties, and so forth, they end up producing more anger, more hatred, that then produces more terrorists. I called it the greatest terrorist-producing machine in history, and I know you've called it the perpetual motion machine. I mean, it's the greatest racket. You kill all these innocent people, you produce anger and hatred that manifests itself with terrorist attacks, and then you use that as the excuse to have more military spending, more defense measures, and more assaults and infringements on our freedom here at home, including the NSA spying, the military taking us into custody and torturing us, and the power to assassinate us, and so forth. So it's really one great big racket here that, if they just got out, would put a real damper on this racket.
That's true, and let's keep in mind also that it depends on where an Al-Qaeda member stands, which that determines whether he's a friend of the United States or an enemy of the United States. The U.S. the U.S. government's against Al-Qaeda when it's in Afghanistan and Iraq, but if it's Libya when they were trying to overthrow Gaddafi, or in Syria where they're trying to overthrow Assad, then they're on the same side as the Al-Qaeda forces. So it's just a matter of geography. Depends on where you stand. One more thing that Karzai is now demanding, and again, this is his part of his late demands. I didn't think this came up last week or before that. He wants any Afghans who are in Guantanamo released to Afghanistan. And, I agree with him. More power to him. I hope he gets his way on that one.
Yeah, I think your point is great about the way they align themselves with some of their enemies sometimes. I mean, if you look at the whole history of this Afghan adventure, when it was the Soviet Union that was doing the occupying of Afghanistan as compared to the U.S. empire, the U.S. was over there supporting all these extremist radicals, including, that was the time when bin Laden was over there resisting the Soviet occupation. And then after the Soviets were evicted, the U.S. acts surprised when these extremists, the same ones they were supporting, say, hey, we don't want you over here any more than we wanted the Soviets over here. And instead, the U.S. goes over there and starts provoking these hornets' nests. We get the terrorist attack in 1993 on the World Trade Center. We get the attack on the USS Cole, the attack on the U.S. embassies, all before 9/11. And I know you were writing, I think 2 or 3 times here at FFF, saying if we don't stop this, we're going to get another terrorist attack on American soil. I mentioned it once. Chalmers Johnson wrote his great book Blowback, where he said the same thing. If you don't stop what you're doing, you're going to get this threat of terrorism. And then we get it. And what do? They don't acknowledge that they're the root of the problem. They go and do more of the same. They invade Iraq under this bogus WMD thing. And then alternatively, we're here to spread democracy and establish a paradise. They use this military invasion of Afghanistan that has actually turned the country into a total disaster with a corrupt regime. What better evidence do people need, Sheldon, than this whole interventionist paradigm, foreign policy paradigm, foreign aid to dictators, invasions, regime change operations, CIA coups? What better evidence do they need that this is a total disaster and it's time to start looking at libertarianism for a right foreign policy?
Well, you're right that there's a huge vested interests, not just financial, the military-industrial complex or desire for natural resources, which Afghanistan has, but there's also just prestige and political power involved. People are reluctant to give up, outposts and bases because there are functionaries who have jurisdiction over those things and they don't want to lose it. It can be as petty as that. It can be as petty as a whole bunch of people not wanting to see their budget shrunk or their staffs shrunk or a loss of some installation that they have, some power over. And I think also a lot of this has to do with Obama and Samantha Power and Susan Rice not wanting to see anything really collapse, real obvious collapse in Afghanistan while they're, on their watch. They want to, if it's going to happen, let it happen when the next president is in power, the next president after that. I don't think they want to, maybe they envision some kind of end of Vietnam War fiasco with helicopters, leaving the embassy and people trying to grab on for dear life to get out. They don't want that happening while they're in power. Kick it up the road. Let someone else worry about that. All those little, what we might think as petty motives are as much in play as big motives, like, big fortunes that you get from government contracts, which, of course, is a factor as well.
Yeah, and I think that there's always the basic philosophical battle that's taking place as to whether the government, this is a legitimate role for the government to be intervening in foreign affairs this way, foreign aid to dictators, coups, assassinations. I think that's one of the real attractive things about libertarianism, is that philosophically, we don't want the government out there doing all these things. That we want to liberate the private sector, which is what the statists want to isolate. That's what the sanctions are all about. Iran, Cuba, and so forth. They want to isolate the private sector and unleash the government. We want to do the exact opposite. We want to rein in the government, bring the empire home, dismantle the military empire, and then liberate the American people. Get rid of all the sanctions and embargoes and stuff. Maybe that's a nice segue into talking about Iran now. That it looks like they've struck this deal with Iran. It's kind of interesting because Obama's getting attacked by, seems like both the left and the right on this thing. From what I can tell, it's an innocuous agreement that really doesn't do much. But really, I'd like to just focus on these horrible sanctions that have just decimated the Iranian people. They often like to say, oh, these sanctions, they're specific, they're targeted to government officials. That's just nonsense. We saw it in Iraq where they killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children, which was one of the reasons there was so much anger and hatred before 9/11 toward the United States. And we see the same phenomenon taking place in Iran, where the U.S. uses the people of Iran as a tool, saying, here, we're going to squeeze you to death. You're going to lose all your money, all your savings. We're going to put you into impoverishment unless you go ahead and oust your brutal dictatorship here. Well, that to me is just another moral abomination, that our government has no business doing this type of thing, either the Cubans, Iranians, Iraqis, or anyone else.
Well, that's the tragedy here. The sanctions are creating a untold misery. Children are going without cancer drugs. The currency's been wrecked. Prices are very high. Things are hard to get. They can't sell the oil. And people talk about this as being harsh sanctions on Iran, but it's not on Iran. Iran is an abstraction. It's on the Iranian people. It's on everyday people who don't hate Americans. And this is just a very, very sad story that I don't think the American people understand. This agreement, this interim agreement, which was struck, will give the Iranian people unnoticeable relief. It's so small that they probably won't even see any difference. It's the most grudging, I won't even call it a rollback, because that way overstates it. It's terrible. On the other hand, Iran has made some very large concessions, but there's an irony here. Everybody is presuming that Iran is on a track to build a nuclear weapon, and yet all the intelligence agencies, U.S. as well as Israeli, say that Iran has never made a decision to go for a nuclear weapon, is not making a nuclear weapon. It's a party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which means it's routinely inspected. All their facilities are inspected. There's never been even a scintilla of evidence that they've diverted any uranium to weapons programs, and so this is under constant watch. Now, with this interim agreement, they're now going to be under daily inspections, and they've even, have agreed during this interim period, 6 months period, to not enrich uranium, to stop building additional facilities. I mean, they have gone so far in the direction of basically surrendering their sovereignty to the United States that it's unbelievable that anybody could be complaining that somehow Iran got the best of this. But I think you have to keep in mind, they're not building a weapon. The accusations being made against Obama and this agreement all have the premise that they're on this race to a bomb, and it's just absolutely wrong. There's no reason why the Iranians and the American people can't be good friends and trade and have tourism and other kinds of personal contact, and that's what worries Saudi Arabia and Israel and their fans in the United States. That's what they're worried about. They don't want a rapprochement. Saudi Arabia doesn't want to be knocked off as a top American ally in of the Muslim world, and Israel doesn't want to be knocked off as top closest ally to the United States. There's no threat from Iran. It's just ridiculous. This is all politics, and Obama should persevere and not listen to any of these critics, or not listen to AIPAC, or not listen to Netanyahu, or not listen to the King of Saudi Arabia. It's just this is a travesty. The way they've conducted themselves with the Iranians.
Well, what I find fascinating is how they're able to come up with these new official enemies on a regular basis, and inculcate this mindset into those that just defer to authority and who just nod their heads and say, oh, yes, this is our new official enemy. I mean, I remember, well, throughout the Cold War, remember it was the Soviet Union and the communists are coming to get us. And that was the original justification for this whole military empire, military industrial complex, U.S. empire, CIA. The whole thing was the communist boogeyman. And when they lost that, they were freaking out for a while. Like, what do we do now? And I remember they were looking for missions. The Pentagon was looking for new missions. And ironically, one of their missions was that they were proposing was that they would go and help rebuild the nations. Yeah, can you imagine putting Iraq and Afghanistan on their resume? But then throughout the 90s, it was Saddam Hussein. And don't forget that the U.S. empire had partnered with Saddam in the 1980s in his war against Iran. And they were partnering with him then because they wanted him to kill Iranians. And why did they want him to kill Iranians? Well, because in 1979, the Iranian people had ousted the Shah of Iran from power that the U.S. had installed with a CIA coup in 1953 and then trained his secret national police force on how to torture and brutalize the Iranian people. Well, then all of a sudden, Iran is turned into the new official enemy. They lose Saddam Hussein. They lose Iraq as a new official enemy. Now, all of a sudden, Iran is going to conquer the world. And, oh, my gosh, they're a threat to the United States. This is absolutely amazing to me, Sheldon. I mean, this is the way of the empire. Fear is the core of the realm. Keep people afraid. Keep them all stirred up that, oh, my gosh, we're here to protect you. We're the only thing standing between you and being conquered by the communists or the drug dealers or the Iranians or the Chinese. We really need to dismantle this whole machine so people can see that you can really live a life of prosperity and harmony and not a life filled with chaos, crisis, and fear, which is an inherent part of this empire and apparatus.
Well, and this is all being driven by essentially two foreign powers, Israel and Saudi Arabia, and their domestic supporters here, which is largely Israel. I don't think Saudi Arabia has a huge lobby in the United States. So it's the Israel lobby, which has a huge amount of influence over members of Congress. Just check out the ones that are today denouncing this interim agreement. Obama has shown some signs of not putting up with this kind of stuff any longer, and I think that's why we finally got this interim agreement. We're now going into a very crucial time, the 6 months, where they're supposed to come up with a final agreement, and Netanyahu has made it quite clear, and his American allies have made it quite clear that they're going to do everything they can to sabotage this, to make sure there's not a final agreement, because Israel's hand has been stayed. Israel has been threatening to attack Iran now for many years. Of course, for many years they've been saying Iran is 6 months away from a nuclear bomb. They say that every so often, and so it's like the receding horizon. It's always 6 months away. But they've rattled their saber at Iran repeatedly. This interim agreement has stayed their hand, because who's going to? No, I don't think anyone will attack Iran. I don't think Israel will attack Iran, while Obama is negotiating and the other Western powers are negotiating with Iran over the permanent agreement. So this at least puts a hold on the possible war, which would be a complete disaster. I mean, the goal number one has to be making sure there's no war against Iran. I mean, that will be just catastrophic. I don't think we can predict how bad the consequences of that will be. So, my preference would be for them to leave Geneva and leave Iran alone and totally normalize relations. But that's not on the table at the moment. So the next best thing is for this agreement to go on, which will then take away from Netanyahu, take the sword out of his hand, which he's been waving at the Iranians for years.
Well, and I think there's room to say that the American people are starting to see through all this. We saw the public opinion against war against Syria. I think that if that public opinion had gone the other way and had supported an attack on Syria, I think Obama would have done it, with or without the approval of Congress. And I think people are finally starting to get sick and tired of this way of life, where it's just constant war, assassinations, torture, killing people. It's this culture of violence. And people have been made to believe that this is an essential part of life, that this is part of what's living in a free society is all about. Chaos, crisis, invasions, coups. It's not. It is, as libertarians have said over and over again, all of this is unnecessary. That it is this U.S. empire, this philosophy of interventionism, foreign aid, intervening in the affairs of other countries. This is the root of the problem. And so I think that when people are looking at the Iranian situation, I think if there is a chance to establish friendly relations with the Iranian people, my hunch is that Americans are ready for that now. I mean, the Iranian people love America. They've always respected America for the values that we've had, the Declaration of Independence and so forth. This notion that, we have to go to war, or they're a threat to our national security, I think hopefully a lot of people are now starting to see through that, and they are as much in favor of just regular normalized relations as the Iranian people are.
Well, that's the big fear. The other side doesn't want normalized relations. A former member of Israel's National Security Council was just quoted yesterday in Politico saying, as a way of condemning this interim agreement, that it gives Iran the signature of being a normal country. And there's a great video which you can find on YouTube by Danielle Pletka, who's a leading foreign policy expert at the American Enterprise Institute. In other words, a leading neoconservative intellectual, saying the big danger of Iran getting a bomb is not that they'll use it, but that they won't use it, and therefore will appear as a responsible country. You can go find that video. Just look it up. Go to YouTube and search on Pletka and Iran, and you will find it. It's astounding. They know darn well Iran represents no threat whatsoever to Israel or to the United States or anybody anywhere else. It hasn't invaded a country in hundreds of years, although it's been invaded. And the U.S. and Israel have been fighting a proxy war and a covert war against Iran on many fronts, killing scientists, cyber warfare, funding terrorist groups that go in and blow things up. The war has all been against Iran. Iran is not fighting, is not pursuing a war against anybody.
Well, and the sanctions, I mean, to me, sanctions are effectively an act of war. You're starving the citizenry of that country, and it wouldn't be surprising at all if the Iranian government were to retaliate. I mean, what would we do if some regime were over here engaged in sanctions or embargoes that was causing the impoverishment, misery, and maybe even starvation or illness of American children? Anyway, Sheldon, we're out of time. That's the show for today. Come over to fff.org. We've got lots of great articles on foreign policy, on the domestic policies as well, the welfare state, the drug war. What we're really trying to do is fight for a free society at FFF and a prosperous society, a harmonious society, a peaceful society. And we do that with ideas on liberty. We believe that ideas matter, that they can influence, that we can change the world peacefully through the power of ideas on liberty. So come and visit us there. We've got also Facebook, Twitter, and this is our end of year fundraising time. That our work depends on your support. There's no way that we can do what we do here at FFF without those of you that help us out, and we're very grateful for those of you that have helped out. We hope you'll renew your support. You'll be getting some fundraising letters from us. And those of you that have never donated to us, a great way to start is by subscribing to our journal, Future of Freedom, that Sheldon edits, and sending us a tax-deductible donation. The more you're able to help us, the more we're able to advance liberty. So thanks so much. That's the show, and we'll see you next time.